Oh man.
Hey guys, Dalek44 here. I need no introduction, but I got one anyway. How many people here besides me remembers the classic BBC comedy Porridge?
Porridge is a 70s British sitcom starring Ronnie Barker and Richard Beckinsale. It broadcast on BBC One from 1974 to 1977. The programme ran for 3 series, including 2 Christmas specials. It's one of the many shows that made Ronnie Barker famous. The series was followed by a 1978 sequel, Going Straight, which saw Barker reprise his character as he tries to avoid getting back to prison. Porridge was later revived in 2017 under the same name as the one spin-off Christmas special in 2016, and it focused on Fletcher's grandson Nigel Fletcher, played by Kevin Bishop. And over the years, Porridge has basically become a British cult classic, and is one of the many shows that Ronnie Barker is most famous for.
And the last thing to come from the original Porridge, before the new show came up, was the Porridge movie in 1979.
The 1979 movie based on the television series was the last Porridge project to be made before the 2017 remake. It brought back pretty much all of the original actors, including Ronnie Barker, Richard Beckinsale, Fulton McKay, and many others. It was also one of the last appearances by Richard Beckinsale, the actor who played Gopper, before he died in March 1979.
So how is this movie adaptation of Porridge compared to the original TV series? Well, let's find out.
Life moves by at HM Slave Prison on a day-to-day basis. The newly arrived and violent armed robber, Oakes, played by Barry Rutter, approaches the slave prison's Mr. Big, Harry Grout, played by the late Peter Vaughan, and using the cut from his last job before being caught, asks for his escape to be arranged. Grouty sets the price, then begins making arrangements. Grout starts forcing Fletcher, played by Ronnie Barker, to persuade the prison governor to allow the inmates versus celebrities football match to boost the prisoner morale and put Slade on the map. Fletcher gets his new prison officer, Mr. Beale, played by Christopher Goodwin, to make the suggestion to tough officer Mr. Mackay, played by Fulton Mackay, who approaches the governor and is accepted. Fletcher then becomes the prison's team manager, and Grout next insists that Oakes be on the team. The celebrity team arrive on a coach. During the match, Oakes fakes an injury and is taken into the changing rooms where he meets with the coach driver, revealed as an accomplice. Shortly afterwards, Gopper, played by Richard Beckinsale, is concussed on the field, so Fletcher takes him to the changing rooms. Taking no chances, Oakes forces Fletcher and the dazed Gopper into the coach's luggage compartment at a gunpoint, then drives out of the prison. Oakes meets further accomplices, and they drive the 3 inmates away in another vehicle. Meanwhile, the prison officers have discovered the escape and the police are searching for the coach, though the prison officers' attempt to help isn't well met, as no one can explain how they let 3 inmates drive out of the front door. Fletcher tells Oakes that they don't want to escape, as he and Gopper only have a short time left to serve, and that they won't tell anyone Oakes' plan because it's them and us. Oakes releases them and they find a barn to catch their breath. After that, Fletcher and his pal Gopper plan to break back into slave prison. Wow, I never thought that'd be something I'd hear Fletcher say.
So how is the movie Porridge compared to the TV show? It's just as good as the TV show in my opinion.
The movie was made during the height of Porridge's popularity. And as you all know, making a movie based on a TV series is not an easy task. Just ask most of the movies that have been released today.
We've got to have money.
But having the same writers and same actors and same directors come on board is a big step up. And it shows that there's a step in the right direction for a movie like this when the same people work on it.
Getting the same actors and pretty much the same writing team to come in and do this movie is a good step forward. I mean, that keeps in true with the original TV series.
And the movie doesn't disappoint with bringing us the laughs that you'd come to expect from the TV series. Pretty much every character from the show gets their time in the spotlight in this movie. There's Ronnie Barker, who plays Norman Stanley Fletcher, the main character of the TV series as well as the film. He's the kind of prisoner who likes to keep his nose clean, do his time, and never let the bastards grind him down. He's the man who knows everything about prison life, and adjusts to it very easily since the first episode. And he's always one that gets on Mr. Mackay's nerves and takes advantage of Mr. Dalek44's good nature.
Ronnie Barker has made a big name for himself in many of the shows he's been in, including the two Ronnie sketch show, Open All Hours, and many others. But his role as Fletcher in Porridge is one of his most memorable and iconic.
Do you see yon screw with his look so vain, with his brand new keys on his brand new chain, with a face like a ferret and a pea for a brain, and his end on his whistle in the morning.
There's also some great character development for Fletcher that once he's out of prison he wants to get back inside to avoid getting into trouble with the governor.
Most criminals who would break out of prison would really want to stay out of prison. But it's very interesting that Fletcher would want to break back into prison, since it shows that he's a man who's willing to pay his debt to society.
And Ronnie Barker plays his part superbly. And it's just hard to imagine anybody else as the character. There's Lenny Gopper, played by Richard Beckinsale, Fletcher's new cellmate, who has been a friend of his since the first episode of Porridge. He's young and naive and wants to go straight as soon as he makes parole. Gopper's the sort of good-natured kind of person who wouldn't do any wrong. Except at some points he does do a bit of sneak thieving behind the prison officers' backs.
This movie would be one of Richard Beckinsale's last performances before he passed away. And it's a real shame too, because if he hadn't passed away they could have done so much more with Porridge. Like perhaps a second series of Going Straight or something like that.
So it's a real shame that the actor passed away not long after this movie came out, but it's a good reminder of his talent. There's Mr. Dalek44, played by Brian Wilde, who most people would remember as Foggy in Last of the Summer Wine. He's a good-natured police officer who most of the prisoners take advantage of. He's the kind of officer who sees the good in all prisoners and wants to make sure that they're ready for going back into society.
I want you to set that an example. Obviously, it's been foolish to finish up inside here, but I want you to show him that with a bit of graft he can make a success of his life.
And as I said, Fletcher usually takes advantage of his good nature by asking him for favours behind other officers' backs. There's Mr. Mackay, played by Fulton Mackay, the strictest officer in Slave Prison, and the #1 adversary of Fletcher. He's a strict stickler for the rules and regulations of Slave Prison, and if he had his way, would see that the prisoners' lives are made of misery. And the actor just brings that Scottish charm to the character that we all know him for.
Come where the hands are clapping, come where the toes are tapping, come where the jocks are strapping down.
Fletcher, if you want to sing, I suggest you form a slave prison glee club.
And even though he's a right bastard at times, you still find him a very likeable character because he's just so funny. I especially love how his mouth tends to open mostly on one side of his mouth. That's just pretty clever and hilarious. And you could say that the main villain of this movie is Harry Grout, played by Peter Forhan, who's the typical badass prisoner who secretly gets his own way behind prison walls. I mean, think about it, he has good facilities in his cell, he somehow gets out of doing his chores, and he just makes other prisoners' lives live in hell by forcing them to do favours for him, and then makes them pay the price if they don't do it for him.
My name's Harry Grout. Don't think we've had the pleasure. These are my friends Samson and Delilah. Samson got his nickname because of the muscles, and she got hers because of her striking resemblance to Hedy Lamarr.
And he's usually always asking Fletcher to take part in some of his schemes. And Fletcher knows how to stay on Grouty's good side and informs any newcomers to stay away from his bad side, and to try not to get involved with him at all, as he's known Grouty for a long time and knows what he's capable of.
Harry Grout's basically the kind of prisoner who seems to run the show behind the police's back. And he's the kind of prisoner you would never want to meet in real life, or even on the streets for that matter.
So he could be seen as a very unlikable guy, but because of the way his character is played, he comes across as a very likable character despite all the nasty things he does. I feel like all the characters from the show get the proper amount of screen time in this movie, and the actors do a great job at reprising their roles. The film was one of the most popular movies of 1979 at the British box office, and has become a cult classic just like the TV series. And because we see Fletcher working on the farm, I always used to think that this took place before he lost his job on the farm. But it was revealed that it actually took place 1 year before the final episode of the series, which makes sense since Fletcher and Gopher were cellmates at the time. This is also a huge difference from the show because they would normally perform in front of a live audience, but this was the first time they didn't perform before a live audience. And I've heard from various sources that they filmed a lot of the scenes from the show and the movie in real prison. And that just makes it look authentic. Unlike the television series though, the film was not a BBC production and has no references to the corporation on the DVD release. It was instead distributed by ITC Films.
So in conclusion, the Porridge movie is one of the greatest comedy films of all time, and it's one of the few films that manages to stay true to the original source material.
Porridge the movie is a great movie adaptation of the TV series and has earned its spot as one of the greatest comedy films of all time. So if you haven't seen this film yet, I'd highly recommend it for any Porridge fan and Ronnie Barker fan. You won't be disappointed with the comedy and some of the great writing and acting from all the actors. Porridge is a great comedy film to add to your collection, especially if you're a Porridge fan.
I'm Dalek44, and I'll see you next time, folks. Little cutie. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Oh, cut.
But it's gonna be alright. It's coming out good. It's gonna be alright. I'm changing my ways and turning the tide. There's a piece of me that no one can take, and it's locked up in my head.
Ronnie Corbett has made a big name for himself with many of his roles, and his role as Fletcher is one of his most memorable by many BBC fans and Ronnie Corbett fans. Not Corbett, it's Barker.
If you want to sing, I suggest you form a Slate Prison Glee Club.